Something happened last week that genuinely bothered me, and I want to talk about it honestly, which is, I guess, the whole point of this show. Kris Jenner had a facelift, and a tabloid claimed that the result was slipping and that she was raging at her surgeon. Then Jenner herself just went on her daughter's podcast and called the whole story a flat out lie, said she loves her results and adores her doctor. So the premise of the entire news cycle may have been fabricated. But that's almost not even the point. The point that I want to talk about is what happened in the weeks in between. Dozens of plastic surgeons took to social media to explain exactly what went wrong with Kris Jenner's face, what technique her surgeon used, what technique they would have used, why deep plane would have lasted longer, why SMAS wasn't the right approach, why they wouldn't have done it that way. All of this completely confident, completely specific about a patient none of them have even ever examined, only based on a Getty image. I have some things to say about that. So let's go. Welcome to Honestly. I'm Chris Lee, MD, plastic surgeon in Chestnut Hill, right outside of Boston. And this week, I'm flying solo because this topic is one where I want to speak in my own voice without managing a conversation, just my honest take. There are three things I want to get into today. First, the surgeon pylon, what it actually is, why it happens, and why I think it's a problem for our profession. Second is the real science of facelifts and what happens over time, because this narrative that drove this whole story may be completely misunderstood. And third, the filter and cost problem, because the Kardashian-Jenner universe has created a very specific kind of distortion that makes all this harder than it needs to be for real patients trying to make real decisions. So let's start with the pylon. Let me describe specifically what happened here, because I think the specifics matter. A tabloid published an anonymous source saying Kris Jenner was unhappy with her facelift results from Dr. Stephen Levine. For the record, Dr. Levine was a renowned surgeon well before Kris Jenner was ever in the operating room. He's highly trained, highly experienced, and by all accounts produces excellent work. The story said that her result was already slipping, that it looked different than it did at 3 months, that she wanted a revision. And within days, probably hours, plastic surgeons across Instagram and TikTok were already posting with full clinical authority, citing specific techniques using technical terminology about what went wrong, what they would have done differently, why their approach yields better longevity. Some produced entire video essays. Some of them, frankly, were using her face to market themselves. I want to separate two things here because not all of the commentary was the same. There are legitimate, thoughtful educators in our field who use celebrity cases to explain concepts to the public. And when they do it with appropriate humility, acknowledging what they do and do not know and what they can't take from a photo, that is a reasonable use of a case that's already in the public eye. That I have no issue with. What I do have an issue with is the confident diagnosis that here's exactly what happened and here's exactly why from someone who has never even examined the patient, doesn't have her imaging, doesn't know her tissue quality, doesn't know what her starting anatomy was, doesn't know what technique was actually used, and has access to exactly what you and I have. A paparazzi photo taken from 40 feet away. That kind of certainty isn't education. It is performative. And to be honest, this happens all the time. And even in my own personal life, people will bring up a picture of someone like Tom Brady or anyone really, any celebrity, and be like, what have they had done? Obviously, they've had this done. And people who aren't even plastic surgeons, frankly, will come and tell me what other people have had done. And I always am very hesitant to say exactly what did happen because, yes, they may have had buccal fat. Yes, they may have had a transplant. There are signs to suggest that in these photos, but also it could be a bad photo. They've also lost a lot of weight. There's like lots of things that go into someone's features more than just their plastic surgery. Other reasons why this happens is the incentive problem. I want to be honest about why surgeons do this because I think the honest answer implicates all of us. Social media rewards takes. The algorithm does not surface the surgeon who says, honestly, I can't tell much from a celebrity photo, and I'd be speculating. It surfaces a surgeon who says, here's exactly what went wrong. Here's my approach, and here's why my results last longer. Competence gets engagement. Nuance gets scrolled by. And surgeons, including me, including all of us, are trying to build practices. We're trying to reach patients. We're operating in a media environment where content is currency and attention is the resource. I understand the incentive. I'm not pretending I'm immune to it. I'm here right now. But I think we have an obligation to ask whether the way we're chasing that attention is serving our patients or just serving our own egos. The real harm isn't abstract. It lands in real consult rooms. Patients come in with screenshots of these posts. They say, I saw this surgeon on Instagram explain that Kris Jenner's doctor used the wrong technique, and now I'm scared to have this surgery. A person who is ready to make a positive change for themselves is now questioning whether any surgeon can actually do this well. They were scared by someone working from the same photo they could have found themselves on Google. And the surgeon got the engagement and moved on. Every surgeon who posted a confident diagnosis of what went wrong, whether or not the premise of the story was even true, which it may not have been, contributed to a climate of fear around a procedure that, when performed well, is genuinely transformative. They scared patients they will never meet for engagement they may not even remember getting. There's a professional ethics dimension to this that I think gets too little attention. There's a longstanding norm in medicine against publicly commenting on a patient's care without their consent and without access to their actual records. It exists for good reason. When you speculate publicly about what went wrong in someone's procedure based on nothing, you're potentially defaming a colleague. You are treating a patient's body as public content without their consent. You are presenting opinion as expertise in a way that misleads the public about what you actually know. Kris Jenner said she never planned to talk about her facelift. She went public originally because the media had already put her face out there. She was pushed into the conversation about her own medical procedure that she didn't even choose to have. And then the surgical community piled on and made it worse. The least we could have done, the most professional thing we could have done, was to stay in our lane until we had something real to say. I'll acknowledge the honest counterargument. It's genuinely hard to resist. The discourse is happening. Your professional opinions feel relevant. You see something in a photo and you have thoughts. I understand that. But it's hard to resist is not the same thing as it's the right thing to do. Those are different conversations. So let's talk about the actual science here, because the word slipping that drove this whole story is doing a lot of work, and most of it is wrong. A facelift result does not stay frozen. It's not how it works. That's not how it was ever supposed to work, or it ever has. A facelift repositions and tightens the structural layers of the face, and then life continues. Gravity continues. Aging continues. Skin continues to change. Volumes continue to shift. What a facelift is supposed to do is reset the clock, not stop it. A well-performed facelift on a 60-year-old patient should make her look well-rested, a well-aged 45 or 50. At 3 months post-op, when swelling has resolved and the result is at its most traumatic, she may look closer to 45. At 1 year, as the tissues have fully settled, she may look more like 50 again. That's not slipping. That is normal. Expected, completely appropriate arc of a facelift result settling in. It's that honeymoon stage. The 3-month result is not the permanent result. Early post-op, there is residual swelling, tissues are still adhering, skin is still redraping. Results at 3 months often look more lifted and more dramatic than the final settled result. Not because something went wrong, but because biology time. The final result is where you're living. And if the final result is a well rested, well aged version of yourself that makes you feel like yourself, that's a success by any reasonable clinical definition of success. Here's something I want to say clearly because a lot of surgeons dance around it. Facelift durability is meaningfully affected by a patient's age and tissue quality at the time of their surgery. These show that facelifts performed on older patients, and Kris Jenner had this procedure at 69, generally produce a less long lasting lift than facelifts performed on younger patients with more elastic tissue. This is not a surgical failure. It is a biological reality that we have to live in. Older skin has less collagen. It has less elasticity. It's been subject to decades of gravitational descent and UV damage and has degraded the elastic fibers and collagen throughout the dermis. You can do everything technically right, and the result will naturally settle faster in a 70-year-old than a 50-year-old. This is known. All surgeons know this. This should be part of every facelift consultation for an older patient, and it does not mean the procedure was wrong for her or that her surgeon made an error. It means that aging is real and surgery works within the constraints of biology and science and not above them. The word slipping implies that something's broken, that a surgical error caused the results to deteriorate. What actually happens is the results settle and age as they're supposed to. And when you compare a carefully curated, professionally photographed post-op image to a candid Getty photo taken a year later in normal lighting without professional hair and makeup, you are not doing fair comparison of surgical outcomes. You are documenting the gap between image management and reality. And that is a very different thing. I want to address the technique debate that dominated the commentary, deplane versus smash, because it deserves an honest treatment rather than the confident marketing it received. Deep plane facelifts operate in a different tissue layer than the traditional smash facelift. Deep plane proponents argue, and there is some evidence to support this, that results are more natural looking and potentially longer lasting because the procedure releases certain retaining ligaments and repositions the tissue with less surface tension. It is also a more technically difficult operation. You are working close to the facial nerves, which demands a higher degree of surgical precision. Smash-based facelifts, including smashectomy and various plications and imbrication techniques, are also well-supported procedures with decades of outcome data and excellent results in skilled hands. The debate between deep plane and smash advocates is real, it's ongoing in the literature, and it's genuinely unresolved. There's no definitive evidence that deep plane produces universally superior results. There are surgeons who produce extraordinary outcomes with both approaches. And really, what matters the most is your surgeon's comfort level with these. And there are plenty of surgeons that do both and think that they have different sort of uses depending on the patient. When someone posts confidently that Kris Jenner's result would have held up better with a deep plane without knowing her anatomy, without knowing what was actually done technically, without knowing what her current result looks like in person, that is not expertise. That is speculation wearing the costume of expertise. And it does something insidious. It teaches the public that this debate has a clear winner when the actual science says it doesn't. So let me talk about something that I think is essential context for this entire conversation, and almost nobody is saying. The Kardashian-Jenner family has, for 15 years, presented themselves to the world through an extraordinary controlled visual filter. Professional makeup artists, professional lighting, professional photography, professional Photoshop, professional social media curation, and professional PR. When you are Kris Jenner, nobody sees your face in normal circumstances. Nobody sees you in the grocery store without makeup on. The version of her that exists publicly is a produced version. Same with all the Kardashians. And that's not a criticism. It is her job. The filter is the product. And people love her for it. And people love them for it. The problem is that when you spend 15 years seeing only the produced version of a person, and then a Getty photographer catches an unguarded moment with real lighting, no touch up, and a candid angle, the delta looks enormous. Not because something went wrong surgically, but because you're finally seeing a 70-year-old woman without a professional image management team. That is what 70 looks like. It's a great 70, but that's what 70 looks like without a makeup artist. That is what anyone looks like without filters and professional light. The Kardashian-Jenner machine has inadvertently set an impossible standard for their own surgical results. Because the only surgical outcome that would survive a Getty photo moment is one that makes you look as good in real life as you do through the filter. And here's the honest truth: no surgery can do that. Surgery works on bone and tissue. It can't install ring lighting. It can't apply 3 hours of professional makeup. It can't add a layer of Instagram smoothing to your skin. Certainly, there are things that can help, like lasers and resurfacing and peels and to get you closer. But fake is fake. I see this in my own consult room constantly. Patients come in with images saved on their phones, and many of those images are filtered, professionally lit, or both. They want to look like that, but that is not a surgical outcome. That is a production outcome. Those are different things. One of the most important conversations I have with patients is, what results are you actually chasing? Because if the answer is, I want to look like my best Instagram photo, we need to have a longer conversation about what surgery can actually do and cannot do. And it's really important for me to set those standards and your expectations at the time of your consultation, so you know exactly what you're getting yourself into. Kris Jenner reportedly spent somewhere between $100,000 and $300,000 on this facelift. I don't know the actual number because I don't work in the office. That number has been widely reported, and I want to say something about it plainly. That is too much money for a facelift. I don't care who is doing it. I don't care what zip code it's in. There's no surgical technique, no level of expertise, no celebrity clientele that justifies $300,000 for a single facelift procedure. That number is a celebrity tax. It is a concierge medicine premium stacked on top of a legitimate surgical fee, stacked on top of a brand marketing. And, all to Dr. Levine for being able to charge that and having people that will pay for it. But it just seems a little bit ridiculous to me. Here's what a facelift actually costs. A well-performed procedure by a highly experienced board-certified plastic surgeon in a major metropolitan market, New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, Boston, costs anywhere in the range of, 15,000 to 50,000 all in. That means surgeon fee, anesthesia, and facility. In the most premium practices with the most sought-after surgeons, that number can reasonably stretch towards 60 or 70,000. At that level, you are paying for genuine expertise, genuine experience, and genuinely high-touch practice environment. That is a legitimate premium. 100,000 to 300,000 is not a surgical outcome. It's a brand experience. You are paying for the waiting room, for the discretion, for the surgeon's access to a specific social circle, for the ability to say their name at a dinner. That may have real value to Kris Jenner in her specific life context. I'm not telling her how to spend her money, but I want regular patients, people who will never spend $300,000 on a facelift and shouldn't, to understand clearly the number attached to a celebrity procedure tells you almost nothing about the quality of the surgical result. The reverse of this is equally important. The $20,000 facelift performed by a skilled, experienced, board-certified surgeon operating in an accredited facility may produce an identical or superior outcome to a $200,000 celebrity procedure. Prices scale with the brand, not the result. Those are different things, and conflating them serves no one except the surgeon charging $200,000. So as a surgeon's brand continues to grow, their experience obviously is growing, but the results are not significantly better. A good surgeon is a good surgeon. So let's get to some questions about this particular topic and facelifts, as well as Kris Jenner in particular. I've been considering a facelift for a while, but after watching all the commentary about Kris Jenner, I'm now scared. How do I know if my surgeon is actually good? First, I want to acknowledge that the fear you're feeling is the exact harm I was describing in the first part of this episode. You were ready to make a positive change. You are now scared because of a news cycle that may have been based on a story that wasn't even true. That's real and it's frustrating. And I want to give you something useful to replace the fear with. Here's how you evaluate a surgeon in a way that bypasses the social media noise entirely. Study their before and after photos, not the hero shots front and center on their website, the full gallery. Look at the afters and ask, does this person still look like themselves? Look for long term results if they're available 1 year, 2 year, 5 years out. Those tell you something that a 3 month result just can't. In your consultation, ask, what technique do you use and why? Specifically for my anatomy, what would you do? A surgeon who gives you a generic answer, says deep plane facelift is always right, rather than one tailored to your specific face, is a yellow flag. Ask what the revision rate is, ask for patient references if you want them, and pay attention to whether they spend more time talking about themselves or examining and listening to you. The surgeons who are genuinely confident in their work let the results speak. They don't need a social media pylon to establish their credibility. All right, here's another. How long should a good facelift actually last? I've heard everything from 5 years to 20 years. Anyone giving you a specific number without qualification is oversimplifying. And here's the framework that actually matters. A well performed facelift does not have an expiration date the way, a car service does. What it does is reset your clock. You will still continue to age. Gravity, skin changes, volume shifts all continue. But you do all that from a better starting point than you would have without the procedure. A patient who has a facelift at 50 and looks 45 at 6 months post op will probably look 52 at age 60 rather than 62. The benefit persists. It's just that aging continues on top of it. A well performed deep plane facelift in a patient with good tissue quality may maintain its primary benefit for 10 to 15 years before a revision conversation becomes relevant. SMAS based results in good tissue may be in the 7 to 12 year range. In older patients with less elastic tissue, closer to 5 to 8 years before revision arises as a question. None of these numbers are guarantees, they're averages. The actual experience depends on your anatomy, your lifestyle, your sun exposure, your weight stability, and genetics. And what I can promise is that the math will always work in your favor compared to not having done it. Yeah, all right, here's another question. I saw a surgeon on Instagram saying Kris Jenner's results looked overcorrected and pulled. But I've seen photos where she looks amazing. How am I supposed to know who to believe? Well, the honest answer, you're not supposed to know because neither source has the information required to make the assessment. The Instagram surgeon doesn't. And honestly, neither do I. Nobody can actually evaluate technical quality of a face of result from a candid photo taken in variable lighting from an unknown angle of a 70-year-old woman who has multiple prior procedures over decades and continues to have procedures. You would need to examine her. You would need to understand what her starting anatomy was. You would need to know what techniques were actually used and how. What I can tell you is this. Kris Jenner, by all accounts, including her own, is happy with her result. That is the most important thing to me, that a patient is happy with their own result. The surgeon who performed it has an excellent reputation built over many years. The story that generated all the commentary appears to have been inaccurate. The pooled assessment may reflect nothing more than what a well-healed facelift in a 70-year-old looks like in a Getty photo without professional lighting and makeup. The person who can actually evaluate this is Kris Jenner and her surgeon. The people posting on Instagram cannot. And neither, to be completely honest, can I, which is why I don't. So let me close with a few things that I want to say clearly to a few different people. To my colleagues who participated in the pylon, I get it. The algorithm rewards it. The engagement is real, but there are patients watching those posts who are now more afraid of having surgery than they need to be, or less trusting of surgeons who could genuinely help them. That is the cost, a real, measurable cost to real people. And I think we owe it to our patients to count that cost before we post. To anyone who has been following this story and is now questioning whether facelifts are worth having, the answer is absolutely yes. When performed well by a genuinely skilled surgeon for the right patient at the right time, a facelift still is the most transformative and long lasting procedure available for facial aging. Nothing that happened this week or last week changes that. What it should change is how skeptical you are of confident social media diagnoses from people working on the same paparazzi photo you have access to. And to Kris Jenner specifically, who will certainly never hear this, but I'm going to say it anyway. Your face is your business. You chose to have the procedure. You say you're happy with it. You love your surgeon. The fact that you've had to spend time on a podcast defending a private medical decision from anonymous tabloid sources and self promoting surgeons is a genuinely strange thing to have to do. You didn't deserve the pylon. No patient does. Most patients don't have their platform to correct the record. They don't have a podcast. They don't have access to the audience to say, actually, this story is false. They just absorb the fear and the confusion and the doubt. And they make decisions or don't make decisions based on a narrative that may have had no basis in reality. This is the actual harm here. And this is what I think our profession needs to reckon with. So I'm Chris Lee, MD, and this is Honestly. Send me any questions you have that you're afraid to ask, because that's what this show is for. Feel free to leave comments in our podcasts on YouTube or send us voice notes over at Instagram at HonestlyPod. So I'm here and would love to hear from you. I'll see you out there.